Have you ever wondered how a small island nation, battered by centuries of invasion and internal strife, went on to control a quarter of the planet's land and people? How did Britain, fractured and forgotten after the fall of Rome, rise to become an empire so vast that the sun was said never to set on it? This is the story of that transformation, a tale of warriors and kings, of explorers and privateers, of ambition, conquest, and contradiction. Welcome to episode 1 of our series on the British Empire, Exploration and the Development of Empire. To understand the rise, we must begin with the fall. In the 5th century, Rome, once the dominant force in Britain, collapsed. Its empire, stretched too thin, was crumbling under the weight of internal corruption, economic trouble, and relentless barbarian invasions. In 410 AD, Rome officially abandoned its British provinces, and without the legions to protect them, the people of Britain were left to fend for themselves. This is when the Anglo-Saxons appear. Migrating from what is now northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, these tribal peoples arrived by sea, carving up Britain into new kingdoms. By 900 AD, they had formed 4 dominant powers: Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia. But unity was a foreign concept. These kingdoms constantly warred, each ruled by its own king, each vying for control. A fractured land, vulnerable to enemies from beyond the sea. And in 793 AD, the sea brought terror. Vikings from Scandinavia landed at Lindisfarne, brutally raiding the monastery there. It marked the beginning of a new era, one of plunder, warfare, and eventually settlement. Over the next 2 centuries, waves of Viking incursions swept across England. In response, a figure emerged who would become legendary: King Alfred of Wessex. Alfred wasn't just a warrior, he was a strategist, a scholar, and a unifier. He resisted the Viking tide and managed to rally the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. But perhaps his most lasting decision was diplomatic. He allowed the Vikings to settle in a defined region of England called the Danelaw. Covering large swathes of the north and east, it was a Viking kingdom in all but name, a strange coexistence of cultures and laws. Still, peace was temporary. In the early 11th century, the Vikings returned, more organized and determined, under King Canute, a Danish ruler who claimed not just England, but also Denmark and Norway. A vast North Sea empire emerged. Canute was a complex man, both a conqueror and a statesman. One of the most famous tales about him, whether myth or truth, involves him sitting by the sea, commanding the tide to halt. When the waves ignored him, he used it as a lesson in humility. Even kings cannot defy nature. But Canute's empire was short-lived. After his death, power fractured once again. Edward the Confessor, an Anglo-Saxon, returned to the throne. His rule was pious but childless, and when he died in 1066, chaos ensued. There were 3 claimants to the throne, but only one throne. Hence, one of history's most famous battles ensued, the Battle of Hastings. William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the Channel with his army, defeated Harold Godwinson, and seized the crown. The Normans had arrived. Their rule changed everything: language, law, and land ownership. The famous Bayeux Tapestry captures the drama: knights on horseback, arrows flying, and Harold's tragic fall. Over the centuries, waves of migration reshaped Britain: Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans. And so too did ambition stretch outward. By the 12th century, England's kings weren't just ruling Britain, they were lords over vast swathes of France. Under Henry II, the English crown controlled the so-called Angevin Empire, England, Ireland, much of western France. The name comes from Anjou, Henry's ancestral homeland. Henry II was no ordinary monarch. Clever and ruthless, he reformed England's legal system and famously clashed with his former friend Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, a conflict that ended with Becket murdered on the cathedral floor. But empire is fragile, and Henry's heirs weren't as capable. Betrayals, wars, and French resistance slowly chipped away at English control, and by the end of the 13th century, the Angevin dream had faded. Still, the hunger for power remained. As England lost its grip on France, it turned its gaze elsewhere. In the 14th and 15th centuries, tensions with France exploded into the 100 Years' War. It was a brutal, drawn-out conflict, marked by moments of glory like the heroics of Henry V at Agincourt. But the 100 Years' War was eventually won by the French at the Battle of Castillon in 1453. This was largely due to the French use of guns against the English. This meant that France expelled the English from their lands, except for the port of Calais. But with defeat came a new idea. Perhaps England's future wasn't across the Channel, but across the oceans. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europe was changing fast. The age of exploration was dawning. Spain and Portugal were sailing west, discovering new lands and opening up vast trade networks. England, watching from the sidelines, realized it was falling behind. That's where Elizabeth I enters the story. The daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558. Her reign would become one of the most celebrated in English history. Intelligent, politically astute, and fiercely independent, Elizabeth faced threats from Spain, internal rebellion, and religious division, but she also saw opportunity. Under her rule, English sailors were encouraged to explore and exploit the unknown. Sir John Hawkins and his cousin Sir Francis Drake were two such men. They were privateers, essentially pirates, with a government license to attack enemy ships and seize their goods during wartime. They raided Spanish treasure ships, disrupted trade, and brought home riches. But there's a darker side to their legacy. Hawkins was England's first slave trader. In 1564, he seized 300 Africans from the coast of Sierra Leone and sold them in the Caribbean. This marked the beginning of England's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, a system that would grow to horrific proportions over the coming centuries. Even as Drake circumnavigated the globe, a daring 3-year voyage that made him a national hero, he too participated in the same trade. He became the first Englishman to sail around the world, but his journey was built on blood as well as bravery. And then there was Walter Raleigh, a courtier, soldier, and explorer who convinced Elizabeth to establish a colony in North America, and in 1585 they founded Roanoke, England's first attempt at a New World settlement. But it vanished, mysteriously, without a trace. Still, the idea had taken root. English colonization was underway. By the early 1600s, settlers arrived in Virginia, but it was no paradise. In 1610, William Strachey described the brutal, starving time when over half the colonists perished. Desperation drove them to horrifying choices, cannibalism among them. Eventually, Jamestown survived. Why? Tobacco. This crop, unknown in Europe, became incredibly valuable. Demand skyrocketed. And with it came the grim realization: profits required labor. That labor came from Africa. Enslaved people were captured, sold, and forced to work in brutal conditions, first in the Americas, then across Britain's expanding empire. By the dawn of the 17th century, England was no longer a fractured island fighting off Vikings. It was a growing maritime power, laying the foundations of empire. Trade, colonization, and exploitation would define the next centuries, spreading British influence across the globe. The tale of the British Empire is not one of pure glory. It is a saga of exploration and exploitation, of vision and violence, of civilization and suffering. The seeds of empire were sown in the ambitions of Elizabethan explorers, the rivalries with Spain, and the pursuit of wealth. Those seeds would grow into something vast and deeply complex. Remember, history is not just dates and battles. It's people ambitious, flawed, brave and brutal. It's the choices they made and the legacies they left behind. And the British Empire? It began not with the waving of a flag, but with a ship setting sail into the unknown. What do you think drove Britain to pursue an empire? Was it greed, necessity, or something more idealistic? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what other historical mysteries you'd like us to explore in this series. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss episode 2, where we uncover how Britain's imperial ambitions turned eastward to the vast riches of India. Until then, watch more of our videos and keep questioning history. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about what it meant,